June 22nd, 1941. At dawn, 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border. It was the largest invasion in the history of mankind, Operation Barbarossa. For Hitler, it was destiny. He believed the war in the East would destroy Bolshevism, seize living space for the Reich, and grant Germany domination over Europe for 1,000 years. Along a 2,000-kilometer front, engines thundered and skies filled with wings. Panzer divisions roared through the fields of Belarus and Ukraine, their tanks cutting through Soviet lines like lightning. Behind them, infantry columns marched through the dust, confident, unstoppable, drunk on victory after the fall of France. But this was no ordinary campaign. The Soviets did not collapse as the Poles or the French had done. They burned everything as they retreated: bridges, crops, villages, leaving behind only smoke and ashes. The Germans advanced into emptiness, a wasteland stretching beyond the horizon. For the first time, Blitzkrieg met a land too vast to swallow and an enemy too stubborn to die. The greatest gamble of the Third Reich had begun. In the first weeks, the Wehrmacht moved like a machine of gods. Cities fell one by one: Minsk, Smolensk, Riga. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were surrounded and captured. The world watched in disbelief as the Red Army seemed to vanish. But in the chaos, a different kind of resistance took root. Behind the front lines, Soviet soldiers regrouped. Civilians sabotaged roads and railways. Priests blessed rifles. Partisans emerged from the forests, striking supply convoys at night. The Germans, trained for fast victory, were not prepared for this kind of war. Their lines stretched thin. Fuel convoys lagged hundreds of kilometers behind, and every mile deeper into the Soviet Union meant fewer supplies and more graves. Yet Berlin demanded speed. Hitler's generals argued, should they strike Moscow or crush the flanks? Hitler chose both. It was the beginning of a fatal divide that would haunt the Reich forever. By July, the Soviet command began to recover from shock. New divisions formed overnight. Factories moved east, beyond the reach of German bombers. The Red Army fought not for victory, but for survival, and survival became its strength. At Smolensk, the Germans faced their first real challenge. Soviet forces refused to surrender. They counterattacked again and again, often with no tanks, only rifles, bayonets, and raw determination. German officers wrote that they were fighting ghosts who do not die. Behind them, Stalin issued Order 227. Not one step back. Cowardice was treason. Retreat was death. It was brutal, but it worked. The Red Army stopped fleeing and started fighting. The Germans won the battle, but lost the illusion. The Soviet Union was not collapsing. It was awakening. By August, the roads were lined with wreckage. German tanks advanced, but their tracks were worn smooth. Engines failed in clouds of dust. Fuel ran low, and supply trucks broke down faster than they could be repaired. In the fields, bodies lay where they had fallen. German and Soviet, side by side. Flies, heat, and the stench of death filled the air. This was no longer the war of lightning. This was the war of attrition. Civilians suffered most. Villages disappeared under bombardment. Prisoners of war starved in open fields. Entire communities were wiped from the map. And yet, through all the horror, both sides believed they could still win. The Germans, because they had always won. The Soviets, because they had nowhere else to go. As the summer faded, the Wehrmacht reached the gates of Smolensk. Moscow lay only a few hundred kilometers beyond. From Berlin, Hitler demanded one final push. The city must fall before the first snow. But the advance slowed to a crawl. Soviet reinforcements poured in from the Urals. New T-34 tanks appeared on the fields, faster, stronger, deadlier than expected. German officers were stunned. This is not the same enemy we faced in June. The sky darkened. Rain turned roads into rivers of mud. Engines sank, horses drowned, and the German dream of a quick victory began to sink with them. For the first time, fear whispered through the ranks. The soldiers looked east and saw only clouds. The storm was coming. By October, the skies turned gray and heavy. Autumn rains soaked the roads, turning them into seas of mud. Tanks stalled, horses drowned, supply convoys crawled at walking speed. The Wehrmacht, built for speed, was now trapped in the slow death of the Russian landscape. Winter came early. Engines froze overnight. Rifles jammed with ice. Soldiers wrapped themselves in stolen blankets, newspapers, anything that could fight the cold. The temperature dropped to -40. Men froze where they stood, their breath turning to crystals before their eyes. The Soviets, born of this climate, endured. They skied through forests, attacked at dawn, vanished into the snow. Their white uniforms turned them into ghosts of vengeance. German soldiers began to whisper. It was not men they were fighting now, but the land itself. The Blitzkrieg had been built for summer, but this was a different war. A war against nature, against time, and against arrogance. By late November, the spires of Moscow appeared on the horizon. Through binoculars, German officers could see the domes of the Kremlin glittering in the winter sun. They believed they had won. One last push, they thought, and the Soviet Union would collapse. But the city was not abandoned. Behind its walls stood entire new armies, divisions raised from Siberia, brought west by rail, trained in the art of winter warfare. They came with white camouflage, new rifles, and endless endurance. When they struck, it was like a storm unleashed. The German front lines buckled. Panzer crews tried to start frozen engines as shells exploded around them. The Red Army advanced, relentless, shouting one word: Moscow! It was not a city they were defending, but their homeland. For the first time, the invaders turned back. The dream of capturing Moscow died in the snow. December 1941. As the first snow settled, the Soviets attacked on all fronts. From Kalinin to Tula, fresh divisions swept forward, driving the exhausted Germans into chaotic retreat. The Red Army, once shattered, now moved with deadly precision. Tanks rolled across frozen rivers. Cavalry cut through supply lines. German soldiers, frostbitten and starving, abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot. The myth of invincibility was broken. For the first time, Hitler's war machine bled and faltered. His generals begged for withdrawal, but Hitler refused. He ordered his men to stand and die where they were. Thousands obeyed. Thousands froze. The front line, once advancing toward victory, had become a graveyard, stretching from Smolensk to Moscow. Operation Barbarossa was no longer a campaign. It was a catastrophe. As the new year dawned, the truth was undeniable. The Wehrmacht had failed to destroy the Soviet Union. The Red Army still stood, bloodied but alive. Factories deep in the Urals churned out tanks, planes, and ammunition. The balance of power was shifting. Hitler's high command was divided. Some generals demanded retreat, others clung to delusion. But Hitler saw only betrayal in their caution. He dismissed his commanders, took personal control, and demanded total obedience. In his obsession, strategy gave way to pride. He had traded the mobility of Blitzkrieg for static defense, turning his armies into prisoners of their own trenches. Every decision he made from that moment onward would drive Germany deeper into the abyss. The road to defeat had begun, paved with arrogance, frozen in ambition, and paid for in blood. By spring 1942, the snow melted, revealing the horror beneath. Fields once golden with wheat were now filled with wreckage and bones. Entire villages had vanished, their names erased from maps. In both armies, millions were dead, missing, or broken. The Germans called it the campaign that should have ended the war. Instead, it had become the campaign that doomed them. Their tanks were worn, their fuel gone, their morale shattered. The dream of swift victory had turned to endless struggle. In the east, new Soviet armies gathered for the next blow. In the west, Britain prepared for revenge. And across the ocean, America had entered the war. Hitler had wanted to conquer the world in one summer. Instead, he had awakened it. Operation Barbarossa, his greatest ambition, had become his greatest mistake. The winter of 1941 to 42 was merciless. In snow-buried trenches, German soldiers wrapped rags around their feet. Their boots had long since disintegrated. Frostbite devoured flesh faster than bullets. Rations froze solid, rifles cracked in the cold. Men huddled together like shadows, praying for a sunrise that never seemed to come. Across the line, Soviet troops endured too. But they were home. They burned whatever they could find, drank melted snow, and fought with a fury born from vengeance. When the Red Army attacked, it was not elegant warfare. It was primal. Bayonets flashed, grenades echoed through the night, and the frozen fields of Russia became graveyards of steel. From Berlin, Hitler demanded reports of victory. None came. The men at the front stopped believing in triumph. They fought now only to stay alive. Spring brought no peace. When the thaw came, it revealed only ruin. Blackened forests, shattered villages, rivers running red with rust. Civilians wandered between front lines, searching for family among the wreckage. The earth itself seemed tired of war. But Hitler was not. He ordered a new offensive toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. If he could not take Moscow, he would take the fuel to reach it. The Wehrmacht marched again, deeper into the Soviet abyss. They conquered cities with names few Germans could pronounce. But every mile gained was a mile farther from salvation. Partisans cut rail lines, bridges collapsed under saboteurs, and the vast Russian sky swallowed yet another army. It was no longer about victory or defeat. It was about survival in a land that refused to die. By 1942, the Red Army had become something new, a machine of industry and endurance. From the factories of the Urals came rivers of steel. T-34 tanks rolled from assembly lines straight to the front. Yak fighters filled the skies. Artillery thundered day and night. Women, children, and old men worked 16 hours a day, forging weapons of revenge from the ashes of their homes. They sent letters to the front, not with words of fear, but of fire. For our land. For our dead. When the German generals saw the scale of production, they understood too late. They had awakened a giant. Every tank they destroyed was replaced by 2 more. Every soldier they killed was replaced by another, harder, colder, more determined. Barbarossa had aimed to end the war in months. Instead, it had created the furnace that would burn the Reich to dust. As the months turned into years, the front devoured everything. The The German army was no longer an instrument of conquest, but of endurance. Its soldiers fought on instinct, without belief, without future. Letters home spoke not of victory, but of ghosts. In the east, Soviet offensives rolled forward like tides. Cities once taken by the Wehrmacht fell one by one: Kharkov, Rostov, Smolensk. Each retreat cost thousands of lives and none of Hitler's pride. He forbade withdrawals, calling them cowardice. Entire divisions vanished under his madness. The dream of empire had frozen and died somewhere outside Moscow. But the Führer refused to wake. He still spoke of victory, as if words could warm the dead. The soldiers no longer listened. They only fought and waited for the end. When the snows melted again, the fields of Russia were littered with the wreckage of Hitler's ambition. 500,000 German graves stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The survivors stumbled westward, not as conquerors, but as witnesses to the failure of tyranny. Operation Barbarossa had begun as a vision of destiny. It ended as a monument to hubris. The invasion that was meant to destroy communism had instead ensured Germany's destruction. From the ruins of Smolensk to the gates of Stalingrad, one truth burned brighter than all the fires of war. No empire can survive when built on arrogance and hate. The snows of Russia buried Hitler's armies, and with them, his dream of a 1,000-year Reich. The greatest mistake in history was complete.